So we're going to represent this nice calm ocean here with 3 pencils, a white or a near white, a light blue, like a baby blue, and a dark blue. So in my example here, I've got Arctic, don't like fast Arctic, mid-ultramarine and denim. That's my trio here, but you can substitute in other pencils if you wish. Our key things that we're going to think about today are loosening up and thinking about the subject that we're drawing here and using those nice fluid flowing strokes. Our motion across the page is going to be nice and natural, and swoosh is going to be the sort of stroke that we're using today, and I'm going to show you how that works and how we can build on some initial almost quite light and fluid strokes, gently layer, gently incorporate some of the features that we can see here, some of these shapes, but without getting too overwhelmed and thinking about all the individual colours and all the little little shapes and things that we can see in here. So I've done this drawing a few times now, and the first one I absolutely hated doing. This is my first one, and it's not actually too bad, but the reason why I hated it is I spent so long trying to replicate the reference photo, and I thought, actually, you know, I quite enjoy drawing and freehand drawing. Let's see if I can replicate this exact photograph here. And then it didn't quite match up exactly, no problem, but I wanted to get enjoy doing all this detail. And then I saw 300 different colours. I saw pale blue, greeny blues, and then I saw very dark blues, almost browny colours, and then, oh, maybe that's a little bit orange, and I got so overwhelmed with thinking about which way my blues were leaning. I did lots of swatching, I did lots of laying other colours on top. So this is my first set here, and then I put the paler blue on top and stretched it around, and I'm just trying to think of all the theory and then do more and more layers, and I was rushing. So what I was doing is I was rushing through this, and I wanted to do a quick sort of recipe for it and get it down as quickly as possible. And what happens when I work quickly is I increase my pressure because I want to fill the tooth. The tooth is sort of the gaps between the little fibres, and if you don't fill the tooth, you end up with sort of a speckledy look to your artwork. And that is fine, and it doesn't bother me generally, but I wanted nice and smooth for my water, and I couldn't achieve that without going harder pressure. And the harder pressure when you went, and then you get into a vicious cycle in order to change and correct colours and things, and basically I've ended up damaging the paper. So I managed to get a nice enough drawing, and it looks okay from a distance, but actually, run my finger over here, I can feel that I've damaged the paper, which is a bit of a shame. So back to the drawing board. I thought, it can't possibly be this complicated. You know, I got a lot of experience now drawing. What am I doing wrong? And those were the things that I was doing wrong, was rushing through and using too hard pressure, and then trying to see everything and draw it all at once. I'm not saying you can't see everything, and I'm not saying don't include all those colours, but what I am saying is, from my experience, start with the 3 colours, and then if you see different colours in there, then bring in some of those different colours. So if you see more of a greeny or darker or inky blue in here, I would leave it till later, and you can make a small adjustment, you can tweak afterwards. So 3 colours, a white or a near white, a baby blue and a dark blue. And that's how I'm going to refer to them in this demonstration. The other thing that I suggest is turning your paper. So I was taught at school when I was writing, always to turn my exercise book and have it flat on. I don't recommend that for sketching or drawing, particularly if you're working flat like I am here. I've got the camera pointing down, and when I'm sketching in particular, I do work on a flat surface. If I'm doing multi-hour portraits and perspective and things are key, then actually an elevated surface is better. So it is good to work from an easel. But basically for this to work and for this to be as most enjoyable as possible, rotate your drawing at least for those first stages when we're just getting in some natural sweeps. If you've not drawn for a while or you're a complete beginner, get some printer paper or some scrap paper, a piece of scrap paper, and just get a few scribbles out on the paper first, okay? Don't worry too much about it. Just get some movement in your arm and think about what feels most comfortable. Does it feel comfortable to move just your wrist? And in my case, what ends up, let me choose a darker pencil. If I end up just moving my wrist, I end up with the same shape. And if I want to do a straight line, it's more difficult. And the only way to draw a straight line for me across the page is to move my whole arm. I'm lifting up my shoulder. If I do this for too long, it's going to hurt, and actually I should probably be set up my workstation a little bit differently if I'm doing this for a long time. We're not going to do it for a long time. What we're going to do is just practice a few gentle sweeps across the paper. I recommend working from toned paper, particularly if you are a beginner. If you are a beginner, then it's easiest when you're looking at any image to see what are the lightest bits and what are the darkest bits. That's the easiest way your brain can interpret that. They're known as the values, and a range of values is what we want in a drawing. So if it was grayscale, you'd have black, white, and lots of different greys in between. We have dark, light, and lots of different variants of that in between, and we also have the complication of colour. First thing I'm going to suggest is just imagine that we've just got the whites here, the lightest areas here are being represented by white, and we're going to adjust those later. White does not show up on white paper. So you'd have to go a shade darker if you were working on light paper. So it's the same technique, but if you've only got printer paper available to you, I'd probably start off with a baby blue. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to see this first step. So the first step is just picking out some little shapes on here. We don't need to replicate this. We're not photocopiers. We just want to think, oh, I'm going to have a gentle sweep here. It's not a straight line across the page, it dips down a little bit. And then I'm going to have another line underneath it here. And then I've got a bit of a line coming around here and then another line down there. So that's what I'm going to do on my paper here. So gentle sweep across the paper. I'm moving my arm, leaving a little bit of a gap for the dark bit there. And I'm coming across here. I'm not worried about being precise with this at all. If that white's not showing up, I'm increasing my pressure ever so slightly. Otherwise, it's super light pressure on that paper. And what I've ended up with is almost like a little zigzag path coming down the page. And there's quite a light, nice end at the bottom here, which is quite straight across that bottom of the page there. So just a few marks across that page. I've done this lots of times. So I've done this. I did it here, and then I did the next step, and I did lots of variants of this. I basically replicated this step multiple times so I could show and photograph a step by step. And the less I worry about it, the less I think about it, the more natural these waves become. So don't think about it too much. I wouldn't hold your pencil straight up, perpendicular to the page. I'd hold it quite loosely, and I'd hold it quite far back, and just move your arm across the page. If it's not making a mark, increase your pressure on the pencil ever so slightly. And then I just floof those. If the lines have become a little bit too precise, so they're too thin, I just floof them out a little bit. So just go over the top of them just a little bit. So now it's almost like we've smudged it. So that would be my step 2. And then the next step is what I call like a glaze of baby blue. So I'm just going backwards and forwards, moving my whole arm. I'm not worried too much about the ripple, the movements up and down, the undulations in this. I'm just going backwards and forwards for time's sake, just to map in the extent of our drawing. So now everywhere on here has got some pigment. I've not filled any tooth in, but I've probably got 2 layers in a lot of places. So I've got some white fuzzed out and then the baby blue on top. And then in other places it's just got the baby blue, but I've not got a raw, a virgin surface on here at all. Because I've already protected the surface a little bit with some pigment, I'm then going to come in with my darks and I'm going to start mapping it. Like you see, I'm holding the pencil really far back, light pressure, so I'm just enough to stop me dropping the pencil. Nice and loose, just sort of a lens shape there, so it's fatter in the middle and sort of peters out at the end. You can flick that out if you want. Don't worry too much about these shapes at the moment. If in doubt, put less pencil down. It's far easier to layer pencil on top than it is to remove it. Just put in some of those shapes in there. If you find it easier to do the darks first, you can do, and that might be the case with certainly with the white paper. But I'd just be cautious about going straight onto a bare surface with a dark pencil. I'd usually put something on there to protect it a little bit first. By protect it, I mean, if you've got all your fibres, you imagine you've got all your fibres and you're going straight onto them with dark pencil, they cling to that first layer of pencil quite easily, and it becomes harder to move that around. Whereas if you've got a white layer down first, or even a baby blue layer down first, and then the darker blue, that darker blue becomes easier to move around if we want to. So I've got 3 pencils now on here. I've got my white, or my near white, so mine's Arctic in my case. And then I've got my baby blue, which is my mid ultramarine, and then I've got my denim in this case, which is my dark blue. So I've got those 3 pencils on there, and then I'm going to rotate through those pencils again. So I went light, middle, dark, and now I'm going to go middle and light. So I'm going to reverse through that order. That is not a rule. That is just me explaining my method, and I tend to circle through my pencils, but I reserve the right to not do that sometimes, but that's what's working for me here. So now what I'm doing is I'm going over the top of those darker colours, that darker colour, that denim, that dark blue, and I'm effectively floofing that out. So I'm smudging that a little bit with this baby blue or this mid ultramarine. So as I say, what happens is that dark pencil, if you've used light enough pressure, it's just sat on the surface. And now what we're doing is we're just moving it around a little bit. So we've not got any harsh edges. What we did in that first stage is something I'd refer to as mapping it out. So it's almost like there's a mental exercise I need to have in those first stages, which is, okay, these are my lights and my darks and my mid-tones, and this is roughly where they are. All the pencil is quite loose on top, and I can move it around if I want to, but it's a quick check for values, a quick check for composition, for blur my eye. Is there anything that's screaming to me, I've missed something, or something needs changing before I go too far with it? It's quite non-committal at that point. So then I go over with that baby blue, and because I'm knocked back, so I've layered on top of that white or that Arctic quite a bit, and it's dropped back quite a lot. So I'm missing out on some of these highlight bits. So I'm just going to come in. I'm using a harder pressure, not hard pressure, but harder than I have done before. And I'm just doing little swooshy motions. I'm putting pencil down on the paper and then I'm flicking it off so it tapers away a little bit. So rather than, so I've got a demonstration here, rather than me being very precise with it and start and stop, you end up, if you looked at this closer, you'd end up with almost a blobby bit at the start and a blobby bit at the end. That's not a nice finish, not a natural finish. We'd much rather have a gentle taper, so it flicks off in one direction and flicks off in the other direction. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm just sort of flicking it out from a sort of central area. So just have a practice doing that. You don't need a sharp pencil to do that. It doesn't need to be a sharp point when you flick it out. So I'm flicking down here. There's a nice sort of almost couple of parallel lines here. It's a nice feature. So my suggestion with a reference photo, particularly for natural features, is to take what you want and leave the rest. So if you get inspired by certain shapes in here, by all means copy them as much as you can on your artwork. I struggle a lot with actually drawing completely from my imagination. I can adjust things, so I have no problem adjusting things and having some artistic license. But if you told me to just close my eyes and draw the sea, I wouldn't be able to. Although I've done this many times now, so maybe this section of sea I'd be able to draw in my sleep. So I just went over then and popped in some refined white shapes with a medium pressure, because it wasn't making any difference with the super light pressure. Across the page, sort of swooping motions, and then I'm going to go over the top, just add in another sort of layer of this baby blue, particularly in those darker areas. And these two sort of lenses here, they almost fade into one a little bit. You see, I'm just spreading the pigment around, flicking out. If it's not making any difference, then I'm increasing my pressure ever so slightly. There we go, flicking across the page, and then rotate back with my dark blue. So with the dark blue, it's quite intense. I don't need to use hard pressure. Looking at the shape here, it's slightly darker underneath this bit here. The bottom of that lens and lightens up a little bit. So I've got a couple more lines underneath there. Taper this off. Flick it down. Not worrying about the tooth showing. So not worrying that it looks quite granular in places. That'll fix itself later on. If you wanted to add in some other colours, if you're finding this quite simple and relaxing, you want to add in other colours, think about where those might be and sort of leave space for that. I'd probably suggest doing this first time round, and it shouldn't take more than sort of 15 minutes or so for this exercise when you're doing it by yourself, so just do it first time round. With those three colours, and then think about on the second run through maybe adding in some accent colours. I'll just grab my white or my pale colour again, and then all we're doing then is just rotating through those colours. I'm not being afraid to go over the white. As long as I'm using hard pressure, I can always make adjustments later. Swooshing across the page. And that's just a case of filling it up as much as you want to. So now I've got the nice, it does feel nice and flowing. It's a bit more white, pale in places than I would maybe want it. So I'm going to come in with my blue, holding the pencil a little bit further down to get a bit more control over it, and I'm increasing my pressure ever so slightly. Just putting a few more layers in. I'd resist the urge to go backwards and forwards and sort of scrub it in. I think we've done such lovely work putting these gentle swoops in. I'd avoid doing that, but that's certainly something that you could do. So there is a technique called burnishing where you actually apply pressure to sort of mix, especially soft pencils together. So you could play with that, you could do that. I do think it's a lot more enjoyable to see it sort of revealed, and very often, especially with these darker areas, what you have to do is almost take it back a stage. So you can see I'm putting white now on top of that dark blue. So that's grabbing any of the dark blue that's loose on the surface, and it's mixing it with the white, making a slightly lighter blue, but it's also filling the tooth in a little bit. But remember, there's nothing to stop you. There's no harm in coming back, reaching for your blue again, adding in, refining some of those details. Take it as dark as you want to go, but it's the same movements across the page, and you can see I'm quite relaxed about it. It's almost like I'm just sort of flicking backwards and forwards, letting it taper off. Some of that tooth has come back again. And at this point where it feels like actually you're happy with the shapes, you're happy with the values, you just want to sort of fill the tooth in a little bit more, I think now would be the time to maybe sharpen your pencil. Manual crank sharpener there. Maybe sharpen your pencil so you've got a slightly sharper point on the end, and then you could use a more upright stroke, and I'd still go sort of in the direction of the wave movement, but you can be a little bit more purposeful about filling in some of those gaps a little bit. So let me just bring in this one I made earlier. So this is where we are at the moment. We're softly gliding backwards and forwards with these long sort of sweeps, rotating through those pencils. So the white or near white, baby blue, dark blue. Add in a grey if you want to. So this is a platinum or maybe a fossil grey with a slightly purple tone, just to make it more your own and to play with those colours a little bit. As I said, it's really nice to work with those three base colours and then make those adjustments a little bit later on. I feel like it gives me a lot more control doing that. I want to do another run through, then a really nice idea is to bring in some accent colours, so something like an orange or a turquoisey green. Think about where they might be on the photo, or rather on the representation of the sea as you want it to be. So the turquoisey green is going to be a nice reflection of a clear blue sky, and the orange might be as we're approaching sunset, or you've got an object in the ocean, something else that you want to sort of play around with. You could start bringing in other colours. There's a bit of blue violet in here as well. So some of these sort of lenses I've streaked a little bit of violet as well, because the violet sits quite It sits okay with the orangey colours and with the blues. It's a nice, violet is a nice sort of in-betweeny mixy colour. So yeah, play around with some accent colours as desired. It's a bit like seasoning to taste. So you're an artist or a chef, you know, what would you add in those final minutes to make it yours and have a bit of a play. And then once you've had a go on the tone paper, maybe switch it up and have a go on the white paper. But yeah, I'd love to see how you get on. I'm going to enjoy just finishing mine off. I'm just rotating through those three colours and just giving it those gentle sort of flicks. If it's starting to go too light, then I'll bring in my white or my lighter colour. And I'm not being afraid of using harder pressure, but I want to save that harder pressure to the end. I want to really leave myself with always somewhere to go, so I can do that. Fill in that tooth slowly with those sweeps, or as I say, a faster way of filling that tooth in is actually to go back and forth with a sharp pencil and almost poke it in. Just be careful you don't lose some of that fluidity, some of that gentle ripple approach if you do it that way. But yeah, I'd love to see how you get on.